my name is Mark Ellis from Stick and Rudder Studios, and in this video I want to take you through a preview of the new remote virtual devices that we've added to the 1.7.0 beta. So why don't we get right into it. So what we're going to cover today is remote virtual devices, what they are, and how do they differ from the existing virtual devices that we have in X-KeyPad now. We'll also cover a little bit the requirements for use of these remote virtual devices with X-Keys configurations and with Stream Deck configurations. And then we'll actually have a real live demo using X-Plane 11 as to how you would create remote virtual devices and use them. So what exactly are these things? Well, they're separate executables, and we have them working on all three operating systems, the Windows, OS X, both for both chip types, and also for Linux. And these separate executables can render keys from either an X-Keys configuration or a Stream Deck configuration. I don't have it doing this yet, but ultimately in the next beta or the one after that, we should have it so that you can actually run these on completely separate computers if you wanted to, although typically you'll probably run on the same machine as your X-Plane machine. So how do they differ from the current virtual devices we have on X-Keys? Well, first off, they're going to have far less impact on your X-Plane frame rate. And the reason for this is that the existing virtual devices we have right now, they have to render as part of the X-Plane draw loop. And, so whatever we do with that is while X-Plane's drawing, it ultimately come around and ask the virtual devices to draw, and that's going to end up taking away from your frame rates to some degree on X-Plane. And how much it degrades it depends a lot on how complex the virtual device is. With these remote virtual devices, they're running in a separate executable. So they don't have to be drawn in the same draw loop as X-Plane. So it's really, much more multi-processor, multi-threaded type of an approach. These remote virtual devices also give you a much more flexible layout. The virtual devices we have now are very hardwired and tied to the concept of those PI engineering keyboards, right? They're basically associated with units and shift states, and you have to have separate key definitions on every unit and shift state that you want. So and also the keys, they have to lay out perfectly in a grid. You can't have keys that are different sizes. And with the virtual device, remote virtual devices, the layout is much more flexible. It works a lot more like the concept of a Stream Deck, where a single key definition can actually show up on different pages, and you don't have to redefine that key. It's the same key, the same way it's going to look and operate if you click it, but you just want it to show up on different pages. And with these remote virtual devices, the keys can actually span multiple grid locations. So let's say you have a grid layout where the keys are typically 100 pixels by 100 pixels. You could lay a key on there and say, I want that to span, two grid sizes wide, two grid sizes, deep, and basically have them so that they're either wider, taller, or just in generally bigger than all the other default keys. They still have to look like a rectangle, and all of the parts of it have to be contiguous next to each other, but they can be different sizes. And as I said before, these remote virtual devices will be capable of running on a separate computer, and there's even a possibility I may be able to get it to run natively on an Android tablet. So one of the requirements of these remote devices is you have to have a unique function name on your X-Keys configuration. That's not there right now. You don't really have the concept of a function, but that's what's been added with this latest beta. You already had that on the Stream Deck devices, the concept of a function name being associated with a key on a Stream Deck device is already there. So you really don't need to do anything on the Stream Deck configurations other than define the remote device and basically do the layout. On the X keys ones, you're going to have to go through and do those function names, but we've put a little helper function there that can kind of generate them automatically for you if you wish. So with that, why don't we actually take a look at how this looks in X-Plane. Okay, so I've got X-Plane up here, and I've got the sound turned on it so that we don't have to listen to the engine and the propeller going while we're going through this video. But the first thing I'm going to do is come in and I'm going to bring up the X-KeyPad configuration editor. Now, in this editor, this is where I have the Cessna 172 virtual device sample already loaded in here. And a couple of new things that we have in here, you'll notice that we've added this new tab here called the definition list. Will actually show you all of the keys, what unit they're associated with. You'll see the shift state that it's associated with, the key name, and we've also added these two extra columns here, which is a function name and a tag. And as I said before, you don't have to have function names if you're just going to use the X-Keys configuration the way you typically have, but if you want to use it with a remote virtual device, you need to have a unique function name for each key in the definition that you're going to use on the remote virtual device. And this is because the architecture of the remote virtual device, it's very similar to the way the Stream Deck works. The remote virtual device knows how to render itself by using that function name in its definition to look up the actual key that does the rendering or is going to operate on a key press. Okay. Now we have the new concept over here of these remote virtual devices, and we can add one here like this. And what you can now do is you can have multiple pages. You can add as many pages as you want in here. And here you can add the actions, that you want. And I've just added an action here. And you'll notice that in the action, you have a couple of different action types. You have a key action, which would be typically a key press. And you also have a go to page where you could specify the page you want to go to, like a page navigation, next page, previous page, and the last page that you were on, before you went to this current page. Now, in a key definition, you actually have to specify a function name here. And at the moment, I don't have any function names on my on any of my keys definitions. So I either need to manually go in and add all those, or there is a tool that will basically take the keys name and put it over here in the function name. And if they're not unique, you're going to have to go back in and modify it. But for the most part in this sample, all of my key names did happen to be unique. And where they weren't unique, it puts in kind of a function name that is like the key unit number, the shift state, and the index of the key. So it kind of makes one up if it can't generate a unique one for it. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to say auto generate key function names. And you can see it went ahead and did that. And I can come over here on the definition list and see what it did, right? So here we've got auto start, the outside air temperature, fuel, and you can see that it basically copied the key name over here. Now if we come down here a little bit, you're going to notice that we run into a couple here where you see the 7 key. That happened to be that the number key 7 that you use to enter something in the number buffer. Now, since that key was already defined up here, and we already used the function name 7, it can't be duplicated. It has to be unique. So what this did is it came up and it created another one that's just basically unit 0, shift 1, key 51, just to give it a unique name. Now, in reality, we don't even really need to use these because once we have that keypad number 7 or 4 or 1 or whatever where it was replicated, once it's defined once, you can use that one function name, any place on the remote virtual device because it basically does a lookup. When it sees that definition on the remote virtual device, it'll look up which key is associated with that function, and then it can use the code on the key to either come up with what the rendering should look like or what should it do when you press or release the key. Okay? And we're going to talk about tags here in a minute. But now that we've got all this, okay, we could come back over to our remote virtual device and, we could add that function name in there, right? And I could either add it in manually, or I can go to this concept of a page layout view, in which case what this is going to show me is all the functions, and they're organized by the concept of tags. Now, I didn't put any tags on here. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So if I click this, I see all of the functions. And I could just come in here and I could start laying them out. So say, for instance, maybe what I want to do is I'm going to put in, say, COM1. I can drag that over here and I can put it, right where I want to have it. This unknown here, this was like sort of that one I had dumped in originally. I'm going to take that and I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to just drag it over to the trash can, and get rid of it. I can now come over and grab another one, say maybe the CDI key, and I can dump it over, let's say here. Now notice what happens is, as soon as I put one in, it's going to always add 2 rows to the right of that one, and it's going to make sure it's got 2 columns to the right, and it's going to make sure it's got 2 rows below. That's so that you can keep adding and expanding, the grid of the remote virtual device. Okay? So I can just come in here and I can just add these. Now, if I come back over and close this page layout view, if I come back over here, you're going to see that these got added. COM1 got added to grid column position 0, row position 1. And the span, in other words, how big is that? It's just one grid location. It's one grid location wide, one grid location, row-wise wide. And I could make these bigger if I wanted to, right? Now, one of the things I can tell you is that it's entirely possible, okay, that if you already have a remote virtual device definition, you can actually use a tool to go through and try to replicate that virtual device to a remote virtual device. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to go ahead and delete these, right? And if I come over here to my virtual device layouts, I have one here. And as long as I got it, let me just show you what that looks like. Okay, if I open that up, this is what that remote virtual device looks like, right? And we only have one unit, and you see that we've got this shift state over here for the cockpit and back to here. Now, you have to understand that with remote virtual devices, they don't really understand the concept of a shift state or a unit. The way you convert a current virtual device to a remote virtual device is it's going to basically take every unit that you got defined, in the virtual device, and every shift state, and it's going to make a page out of it. You'll ultimately have to go back in, and if you have multiple units and you've got multiple shift states that you're using, you will have to go back into the remote virtual device, and you're going to have to modify those keys so that they actually do go to page, previous page, next page type of a concept. But let's go ahead and make one. So we come over here to our virtual device layouts. You see I've got one here, and there's a button down here say create remote virtual device. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then if I come back over here to this remote virtual device, it actually created it on device 2. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. So now it's on device 1. You can see that what it did is it basically added all of those on here. And there's 2 pages. This is the unshifted state for that unit. And here's the shifted state that's got all those views on it, right? Now again, I can go to the layout view, and here we see them all, here. And anything that I want to change, I can move it. Like as an example, this shift state, this isn't really going to work, okay? I've got to really make that be a navigation to the next page. So I'm going to take this up here and I'm going to drag it and get rid of it. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add a go to next page, and I'm going to drag that over here to this. And it's going to say next page, right? And then on the next page, where it says, this is basically that old shift key, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to come up here and grab the previous page, and I'm going to drag it over and put it there. So you kind of get the concept that even though it went through and it created all this for us, One of the challenges is it doesn't understand this concept of shift and unit names. That you're going to have to go back in and add in any kind of page navigations you want to get it to, to do that. Okay, now that we've got this created, why don't we go ahead and see what a remote virtual device is going to look like. Okay, so if I come over here, you'll notice that in my plugins, the X-KeyPad folder, there's a new folder here called Remote VD. If I click in there, you're going to see that there's folders here for Linux, OS X, and Windows. These are where the Remote VD executables are. So if I go to Windows and I double click this, it'll bring up this remote virtual device. And there it is, right? I can make the taxi lights work on and off, strobe lights, just by clicking them, flaps. You can see that it works just like a normal remote virtual device, does. Now, there's a couple of things right now. I don't have this 100% done yet. So one of the challenges is this does not keep track of its size. So each time you start it, you're going to have to resize it to what you want. It also won't remember where you put it on the screen. I will fix that in one of the next betas. I have to figure out how to do it and how I'm going to make it work. But other than that, you could see that it kind of looks exactly like the current virtual devices, okay, that we had before. And you will notice that if you look closely at frame rate usage, it is really light on frame rates, right? It doesn't really take hardly anything, from X-Plane. So they work pretty good. Okay, now here you see I've got that next page. See, I put that page navigation in there. And if you want, you can actually have a key definition with a function on it that shows you maybe like an image with arrows or whatever you want. This doesn't have to be static like this. You can make it, look custom as to whatever you want it to look like. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how that works. Okay, and if I want to make any changes here, let's see if I can bring that down. And what I'm going to do is see if I can make Windows be a little bit smaller so I can get both of these up here at the same time. Okay, let's say as an example, let's say I want to, maybe move these guys around. I want this XPDR to be over in the barrel key, or I want to get rid of the barrel key. I'll show you how you can do that. I can go to the layout view, right? And where is that? Here's the XPDR. Let's say, for instance, what I want to do is I want to move this over here, and I want to move the barrel key back over here. Now, it does not update this remote virtual device right away. And that's simply because I didn't want to have a whole lot of communication going back. But all you have to do is click on Refresh Virtual Device, and you'll see that it switched these two keys, right? If I want to get rid of the barrel key altogether, all I have to do is drag it up. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see the trash can button. Just drag the barrel key over, drop it into the trash, and then do a refresh. And you can see the barrel key is now missing. Okay? So you can adjust your layouts. You can move them around. You also, could do it, manually over here, by copying and pasting and things like that. But I think the layout view is probably the easiest way, to lay out these remote virtual devices. Okay? Let me quickly show you the tag concept. So you notice I have no tags here right now. If I close this and I come over to my definition list, let's say, for instance, I want to tag all of the radios. I'm going to come in here and do a filter for COM. I'll make a tag called radios. Control C, paste, paste, paste. I think I could also maybe consider the transponder to be a radio. Paste. Also, I think my nav things were radios, not the nav lights, but we'll do paste. Yeah, that was actually, I think, the autopilot. So paste, 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 right? Maybe we'll do the lights now. Yeah, there's the lights. I'll make a tag called lights. Highlight, paste, 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 paste. Okay. Now, if I come back over here to this remote virtual device and I go to the layout view, now you see that things are organized okay to either all the stuff that's got no tag on it, or here's all the lights, and here's all the radios. And you either can, if I had comments on anything, I don't know if I put a comment in these, but if there's a comment on the key, you'll actually see that showing up here, you know, where you can actually see what that key does before you turn around and drag it and lay it over someplace, okay? So I think this gives you a sense of how it works, okay? I'm going to go ahead and save that, okay? And I'm going to close this virtual device. Actually, I think I'll leave it open, okay? And let's come over and take a look at a Stream Deck. So you can see I've got all of my functions here, and this is basically the function names for things. And let's say I want to create a remote virtual device for this. Now at the moment, there's no way to automatically create and lay out a remote virtual device for a Stream Deck. I may give you the ability to import a Stream Deck profile, but I haven't decided yet whether that's really going to be a typical thing you're going to want to do or not. And the reason being is that these remote virtual devices can be much larger format than a typical Stream Deck device. Like a Stream Deck XL can have, I can't remember exactly what it is, it's maybe 32 keys. If you're going to run this on a 1080p monitor or a touch screen, you can have a lot more keys on it. So the likelihood that you're going to want to just grab somebody else's, Stream Deck XL layout and use that, maybe you would, but you're more likely going to want to go through and create your own because you can fit a lot more on it, right? So you can have less pages and more things on a page. But if you guys really want it, there is a possibility of being able to import a Stream Deck profile and have it do the layout similar to the way we, converted the virtual device to a remote virtual device on the X-Keys device. But anyways, that being said, let's go ahead and create one by hand. So we're going to do an add remote virtual device. We've got our first page here. I'm going to go to the layout view. And again, you can see that I don't have any tags on here, right? I could go back and add tags to the things, but let's assume what I'm going to do is start laying out my radios. I'm going to throw my COM1 over here. Maybe what I'll do, put the COM2 over here. What else do I want to put on here? Maybe I'll throw in some nav lights, some lights. Taxi lights, okay. And now I'd like to take a look and see what that remote virtual device is going to look like. Now, here's a concept that's important for you to understand. When you bring up these remote virtual device executables, these guys here, the way they work is every time you run one, it's going to go out and try to connect to X-Plane, and it's going to attempt to attach itself to a remote virtual device definition. And there's a precedence in the way it does this. Each instance of this executable that you bring up, it's going to go out and first try to attach itself to all unattached X-Keys remote virtual devices. If it can't find any, it's going to move over to the Stream Deck and do the same thing there. So the first thing it does is look to see if there's a virtual device 0 specified for the X-Keys. If it does, it attaches to it. If I double click a remote VDE XE again, it's going to say, do I have a remote virtual device number 1 for the X-Keys? If it does, it's going to attach to it. If it does not, it'll then switch over to the Stream Deck and say, do I have a remote virtual device 0 for the Stream Deck? I'm not sure this is the perfect design decision that I did for it. I have to think about it a little bit, but that's currently the way it works. So since we already have a X-Keys virtual device, this is what this one's doing. So when I double click on this one, since I only have one X-Keys virtual device, it should go over and attach itself to the Stream Deck one. Let's see if it works. And sure enough, it did. Here's my COM1 and COM2 key that I laid out here, and here's my taxi light. And if I click it, you can see that it goes on and off. And that mimics exactly, what we had going on with a Stream Deck, configuration. Okay, if I were to come in here and delete my X-Keys virtual device, this would come up and attach directly to the Stream Deck one, which would be the only one left in the system that I've got defined. I don't know how often people are going to use Stream Deck definitions in combination with X-Keys definition. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The more likelihood you're going to have is maybe what you did is you found a Stream Deck configuration, out there that somebody had done, say, for instance, Sanders Airbus One, and you want to use all of that. You'll probably just go ahead and create a virtual device for that Stream Deck, definition and use that separately. If you were going to start completely from scratch, I think, to be honest with you, the X-Keys key definitions have got a lot more capability to them. You have a lot more ability to lay out the keys. The fonts on the segments, okay, that you have can actually be, different. You have a lot more control over it, okay, than you do with the Stream Deck itself. One last thing on the Stream Deck. I have to add this yet, but if you come over and you take a look at the Stream Deck definitions, COM1, at the moment, I don't have, you can define the font and the font color that you want, but what I don't allow you to do is define the alignment. You can do this on the Stream Deck layout thing. You can define whether you want the text aligned to the top or you want the text aligned to the middle or the bottom of the key. At the moment, it's always in the middle is the way I have it. It always renders the text starting kind of in the center of the key, and making it so it's always in the middle and always in the middle left to right too. That I think I do want to enhance this so that you can override that here. I just haven't done it yet. Okay. A couple of other things. There's this concept here of a static. This is where keys don't change. Typical example of those might be the number keys on the keypad. They're just static, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with the red background. Once you render them, there's no need to check to see if that definition, the layout or the label of that is going to dynamically change because you didn't put any conditional background colors or anything like that on it. If you make it static, it basically just reduces the amount of effort that X-KeyPad has to do on every frame to say, did this key change? If I forced it once, it's not going to change again. No bother to come in and try to check it. It'll just cut down a little bit on how much effort X-KeyPad has to do, on each frame to figure out whether the key change has to be pushed over to the remote virtual device. Okay? Most likely, what I'm finding with this, there's so little impact on X-KeyPad with these remote virtual devices, you may not even really need this. Okay? So that's a preview of this. At the moment, I don't have any of the documentation updated. I figured I'd wait a few weeks and see what the feedback is on these remote virtual devices. I need to get a few more things done to them, like having them be able to remember their locations and stuff. Oh, and one other thing I do want to show you is this concept of fit to page. Let me close this one. Let's come over to this guy here. You'll notice with this remote virtual device, the keys are kind of fixed in size. That's because we have it here with a grid width and height of 100 pixels and a grid spacing of 3 pixels. One of the things you can do is go to fit to page, and if I refresh that remote virtual device, you'll now notice that as I increase the window size, the keys will change in size. They don't keep their proportion, right? But they'll get bigger or smaller. The other thing you can do is you can also set your font sizes. So if I'm going to make it big like this, I can also come in and say that I want the font scaling to maybe be 1.5, which means that the fonts are going to be 150% bigger than they currently are. Now, this does require a restart of the virtual device. So let me shut that down, and I'll run it again. And I have to run it again to get it to attach to the other guy. And you'll notice here now that all the fonts are bigger because I scaled them up. The only problem with the font scaling is you have to shut the remote virtual device down and restart it again to get it to do that. Okay. So sometimes that's helpful if somebody has defined a remote virtual device that's working on, let's say, a 4K screen, and everything is just a little bit too big. When you run on a 1080p, you can scale the fonts back a little bit, or conversely, the other way around. If they define it to run at 1080p, but you're going to run it on maybe a 4K touch monitor, you can scale the fonts up a little bit if you want to get it so that it looks a little bit better. And generally, fonts should scale up pretty well. Keep in mind, if you try to scale them down too much, they can get a little pixelated, but you can experiment with that and see whether or not that's going to, do the trick for you. I'm just going to set this back okay to 1 and save it. So I think that gives you kind of a preview of what you can do with these remote virtual devices. They are completely optional. You don't have to define them, if you don't want to. You can continue to use these remote virtual devices, the virtual device layouts we have in here. They work perfectly good. The only disadvantage with them is that they do tend to take a little bit more frame rate, and they're only usable on X-Keys devices, as opposed to both X-Keys and Stream Decks, like you can with the remote virtual devices. Okay, I hope this helps you get started with these. Remember, this is very much a preliminary preview of these. I'm going to be trying to make more enhancements to it. I'll try to get your feedback in the forums on what you think about it, and ultimately we'll redo a video that really shows how to use these once I've got them completely completed. Okay, thank you very much for watching.